I was stirring soup when my daughter Sarah called. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and childhood memories, steam rising from the pot like all the dinners I'd made in this house for 40 years. "Mom, don't come tomorrow," she said, her voice strangely flat. "We sold your house." The wooden spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the linoleum floor my husband had installed in 1982. I hung up quietly. No goodbye, no questions. My hands moved on autopilot as I wiped them on my apron, the one Sarah had given me for Mother's Day with "World's Best Mom" embroidered in crooked letters when she was 9. I walked to the oven and opened it slowly. Inside, where a casserole should have been, was the document she thought she burned last week when she'd visited. The edges were barely singed, and at the bottom, clear as day, was her own signature authorizing my placement in a state-run facility. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Dorothy, and I'm 68 years old, though my daughter apparently thinks I'm old enough to be thrown away. You wouldn't know me from anyone else at the grocery store. Just another gray-haired woman checking expiration dates and clipping coupons. But every wrinkle on my face has a story, and most of them involve sacrificing something for my children. When my husband died of a heart attack 30 years ago, leaving me with 3 kids and a mortgage, I didn't remarry. I didn't date. I didn't take that art class I'd been dreaming about since high school. Instead, I took double shifts at the hospital, cleaning bedpans and mopping floors, my back screaming while I smiled at patients who never knew my name. Sarah was my youngest, my baby girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. When she needed braces, I sold my mother's pearl necklace. When she wanted to join the cheerleading team, I sewed her uniforms myself because we couldn't afford the official ones. Nobody ever knew the difference. I learned to make magic with ground beef 20 different ways, convinced my kids that breakfast for dinner was a fun tradition instead of a necessity when payday was still 3 days away. I once wore shoes with holes in them for an entire winter, cardboard stuffed inside to keep the snow out, just so Sarah could have the same winter coat as her classmates. The other mothers at school called me Saint Dorothy, always volunteering for bake sales despite working nights, always the first to offer help when someone else struggled. But I wasn't a saint. I was just a mother who believed that love meant giving everything and keeping nothing for yourself. When Sarah graduated from college, debt-free because I'd worked myself to the bone, she hugged me and whispered, "I owe you everything, Mom." I told her she owed me nothing, that seeing her succeed was payment enough. This house, where she was trying to ship me from, wasn't just property. Every scratch on the hardwood told a story. The pencil marks on the doorframe charted my children's growth. The kitchen table still had the burn mark from when Michael tried to make me breakfast at age 7. The back door still stuck in the same place where Tommy had slammed it during his teenage years. This was the house where I'd stayed up all night with sick children, where I'd hosted 17 Thanksgivings, where I'd cried alone in the bathroom so my kids wouldn't see me breaking. But now my daughter, the one I'd given my youth to raise, had decided I was an inconvenience. At 68, I was apparently too old to deserve the home I'd paid for with 4 decades of sacrifice. My mornings had a rhythm that felt like breathing. The old floorboard by my bed would creak at exactly 5 a.m. when I stepped on it, better than any alarm clock. I'd shuffle to the kitchen in my worn slippers, the ones Sarah always said I should throw away but couldn't because Michael had given them to me 5 Christmases ago. The coffee maker, purchased in 1995, would gurgle and spit like an old friend sharing gossip. I'd take my first cup black standing at the sink, watching the cardinals that nested in the oak tree my husband and I planted the year Sarah was born. By 5:30, I'd be in my garden talking to the tomatoes like they were old friends. The neighbors thought I was crazy, but those plants thrived on conversation. Mr. Henderson next door would wave from his window, and I'd hold up whatever vegetable was ready for picking. We'd had this silent morning exchange for 15 years. The garden was my autobiography written in soil. The strawberry patch marked Tommy's high school graduation. The butterfly bush celebrated Michael's first job. The yellow roses bloomed where I'd scattered some of my husband's ashes, keeping him close while letting him go. Tuesdays meant book club with the church ladies. We hadn't actually finished a book in 3 years, but nobody cared. We'd gather in my living room, Agnes would bring her famous pound cake, and Martha would pretend she'd read past chapter 2. We'd end up talking about our grandchildren, our aching joints, and the way the world was changing too fast for us to keep up. They'd compliment my needlepoint pillows, not knowing I'd made them during all those nights I couldn't sleep, worried about bills or kids, or the leaking roof I couldn't afford to fix. Wednesdays were for grocery shopping at Morton's, where I'd worked part-time after retiring from the hospital. Young Casey at the checkout always double-bagged without being asked, knowing my arthritis made carrying heavy bags difficult. I'd buy the same things every week: chicken thighs on sale, whatever vegetables looked freshest, a box of cookies for the grandkids, and one chocolate bar that I'd eat slowly throughout the week, my only indulgence. Thursdays, I volunteered at the library, reading to preschoolers who didn't care that my voice sometimes cracked or that I had to squint even with my reading glasses. Their eyes would go wide during the exciting parts, and they'd lean forward when I'd lower my voice for suspense. Little Emma would always hug my legs before leaving, and her mother would apologize, but I treasured those sticky-fingered embraces. They reminded me why I'd chosen to be a mother back when my own children still thought I hung the moon. But Fridays were magic. That's when the grandchildren came. Sarah would drop off her 2 boys, claiming she needed to run errands but really just wanting free babysitting. I didn't mind. Those boys brought life into rooms that sometimes felt too quiet. We'd bake cookies from scratch, the kitchen destroyed in flower explosions, their laughter bouncing off walls that had heard too many arguments and not enough joy lately. They'd call me Grandma Dot and fight over who got to lick the spoon. Evenings were quiet, just me and the television that still had bunny ear antennas because cable seemed like an unnecessary expense. I'd eat dinner at the same spot at the kitchen table, the other 5 chairs empty but somehow still full of memories. Sometimes I'd make a full pot roast just to have the smell fill the house, eating leftovers for a week rather than admit I didn't know how to cook for one. Before bed, I'd check all the locks twice, water my indoor plants, and stand in the hallway looking at 40 years of family photos. This routine wasn't exciting, but it was mine. This life wasn't glamorous, but it was earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. This was the life Sarah thought needed disrupting. This was the peace she wanted to steal. 3 weeks before that phone call, Sarah had started visiting more often. At first, I was thrilled. My daughter, who usually managed only monthly visits despite living 20 minutes away, was suddenly stopping by twice a week. She'd arrive with fresh flowers and that same bright smile that used to greet me after school, but something felt different. Her hugs lasted a second too long, like she was memorizing me. Her eyes would drift around rooms she'd grown up in, but it wasn't nostalgia I saw there, it was calculation. The first odd moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been napping in my chair when I heard drawers opening upstairs. Sarah was in my bedroom, going through my dresser. "Just looking for that sweater you promised me, Mom," she called down when I asked what she was doing. But I hadn't promised her any sweater. My memory might be 68 years old, but it still worked fine. I climbed the stairs to find her photographing papers from my filing cabinet with her phone. "Digital backup," she explained quickly, her laugh too high-pitched. "You know, in case there's a fire or something. Can never be too careful at your age." At my age. She'd been saying that a lot lately. Every forgotten grocery item became evidence of decline. When I couldn't find my reading, glasses that she'd moved, she'd exchange worried looks with her husband Dave. "Maybe we should talk about getting you some help, Mom," she'd suggest gently. But I didn't need help. I needed my daughter to stop rearranging my life. The following week, she brought a stranger to lunch. "This is Carol," Sarah announced, as if I should know who Carol was. The woman had a clipboard and kept asking strange questions. How often did I forget to take medication? Never, I told her. I used a pill organizer. Did I ever leave the stove on? Once, 20 years ago, and Sarah had done it last month at her own house. Could I manage my finances? I'd been managing them since before Sarah was born. Carol nodded and made notes while Sarah watched eagerly. It felt like an interrogation disguised as concern. Then there were the phone calls. Sarah would step onto the porch to take them, but my kitchen window was always open. I heard fragments. Assessment complete. Timeline for transition. Power of attorney covers everything. When I'd join her outside, she'd quickly end the call. "Just work stuff, Mom," she'd say. But Sarah worked at a real estate office. What kind of real estate conversation required such secrecy? The medication incident started the next week. After Sarah's visits, I'd feel unusually drowsy. My afternoon tea would taste slightly bitter. One day, I caught her adding something to my cup when she thought I was in the bathroom. "Just sweetener, Mom," she insisted when I confronted her. But I'd been drinking my tea with 1 sugar cube for 50 years. I didn't need sweetener, and I certainly didn't need whatever she was putting in my cup. She became obsessed with my daily routine. Did I shower regularly? Of course. Did I remember to eat? How could I forget when my whole schedule revolved around meals? She'd check the refrigerator dates like a health inspector, throwing away items that were perfectly fine. "This milk expires tomorrow, Mom. You can't drink that." Since when did tomorrow mean expired? She was building a case, and I was starting to realize I was the defendant. The final straw was finding her in my office at 11 p.m. when she thought I was asleep. She had my Social Security card, my birth certificate, my husband's death certificate, and the house deed spread across the desk. The scanner was warm. She'd been copying everything. "Couldn't sleep," she explained. "Thought I'd help organize." But nothing needed organizing. Everything had been in its place for years. That night after she left, I sat in my kitchen, feeling something I'd never felt about my daughter before: fear. I spent the next 3 days convincing myself I was losing my mind. Sarah was my baby girl, the one who'd written me poetry in 3rd grade about how I was her hero. This was the child who'd sobbed in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart, who'd called me from college just to hear my voice when she was homesick, the daughter who'd held my hand at her father's funeral, promising we'd get through it together. That girl couldn't possibly be plotting against me. I was being paranoid, maybe even showing signs of the dementia she kept hinting at. Standing in my bathroom mirror, I examined my face for signs of decline. Was I becoming one of those suspicious old women who accused everyone of stealing? My mother had gone through a phase like that near the end, convinced the mailman was reading her letters. Maybe it was hereditary. Maybe Sarah really was just being a concerned daughter, and I was too proud to admit I needed help. The thought made me sick, but it was better than believing my daughter was capable of betrayal. I called my son Michael that evening, fishing for reassurance without revealing my fears. "Has Sarah seemed different to you lately?" I asked casually. He laughed. "She's always been intense about planning, Mom. Remember how she organized her stuffed animals by height and species?" We reminisced about Sarah's childhood quirks, and I felt foolish. Of course she was just being organized. She'd inherited my need for control, that's all. When Michael mentioned Sarah had asked him about my health recently, I told myself siblings naturally worried about aging parents together. The next morning, I found Sarah's birth announcement in my jewelry box, the tiny card with her footprints that the hospital had given me. 6 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect. I'd loved her before she took her first breath, loved her through colic and teenage rebellion and failed marriages. That kind of love doesn't just disappear. Children don't just turn on mothers who gave them everything. I was manufacturing drama where none existed, probably because my life had become too quiet, too routine. When I discovered my checkbook in Sarah's purse during her next visit, I actually apologized to her. "I must have put it there by mistake," I said, though I knew I hadn't been near her purse. She smiled so sweetly. "Oh, Mom, you're always misplacing things lately." I nodded, accepting the false narrative because the alternative was unbearable. When she suggested I might have forgotten about agreeing to let her organize my finances, I almost believed her. Memory could play tricks, couldn't it? I started leaving myself notes, testing my own recall. Grocery lists, appointment times, phone numbers I'd known for decades. I passed every self-imposed test, but doubt had planted itself like a weed. Maybe I was fooling myself about my capabilities. Maybe I did need supervision. When Sarah brought paperwork about senior communities with swimming pools and activity centers, I let her leave the brochures on my kitchen table. They looked nice in the pictures, full of smiling elderly people playing cards and doing water aerobics. That Sunday at church, I almost confided in Pastor Williams, but stopped myself. What would I say? That I suspected my daughter of something sinister because she was being attentive? He'd probably think I was having a breakdown. Agnes from book club mentioned how lucky I was to have such a devoted daughter. "Sarah's always checking on you," she observed with envy. "My kids barely call." I smiled and agreed, swallowing the unease that rose like bile. The worst part was the guilt. How could I think such terrible things about Sarah? She was probably stressed about her own life, worried about me aging alone, trying to be a good daughter. I was the monster here, suspecting my own child of malice when she was showing care. That night, I actually called Sarah to apologize for being difficult lately. "I know you're just trying to help," I said. "Don't worry, Mom," she replied. "Soon everything will be taken care of." The discovery happened by accident, like most terrible truths do. I was cleaning Sarah's old room, the one I'd kept exactly as she'd left it for college, minus the boy band posters she'd begged me to throw away. The dust ruffle on her bed had come loose, and when I knelt to tuck it back, my hand hit something wedged between the dresser and the wall. It was a business card, expensive cardstock that felt like dread between my fingers. Premier Senior Living Facilities, Involuntary Placement Specialists. Below that, in smaller print, "When loving them means making hard choices." My legs gave out. I sat on Sarah's childhood bed, the pink comforter she'd picked at 13 still bright despite the years. Involuntary placement. The words echoed in my skull like a diagnosis. I turned the card over with shaking hands. There, in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, the loops I'd taught her in 2nd grade. "Mom, December move-in date confirmed. Room 247B, Medicare covers base, house sale covers premium care package." December. That was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks before my daughter planned to cart me off like furniture to storage. Room 247B. They'd already assigned me a number, reduced me from Dorothy to a bed assignment. I noticed the card was worn at the edges, carried in someone's pocket or wallet for who knows how long. This wasn't a new plan. This was something she'd been carrying around, waiting for the right moment. I Googled Premier Senior Living on my ancient computer, waiting for the dial-up internet to load. The first result was a news article. State investigation finds neglect at Premier facilities. The second, families sue Premier over unexplained deaths. I clicked through pages of horror stories. Residents left in soiled clothes for hours. Medications mixed up or forgotten. One woman found dehydrated because staff forgot to bring her water for 2 days. The photos showed gray walls, hospital beds, elderly people staring at nothing. This wasn't a senior community. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. The reviews made me physically ill. "They drugged my mother until she didn't recognize us anymore," one daughter wrote. "My father went in walking and talking. 3 months. Later, he couldn't remember his own name," wrote another. The few positive reviews read like advertisements, probably fake. The facility's website showed stock photos of smiling seniors that appeared on dozens of other sites. Nothing was real except the Medicare fraud allegations and the lawsuits. I found their admission requirements next. Involuntary placement needed either severe dementia diagnosis or power of attorney with documented evidence of inability to self-care. That explained the strange woman with the clipboard, the questions about my daily routine, Sarah's sudden interest in my medications. She'd been building a case file on her own mother. Every forgotten word, every misplaced item she'd moved herself. every drowsy afternoon after she'd drugged my tea. It was all evidence for this placement. The premium care package cost $8,000 monthly. Basic Medicare coverage was $3,000. The difference would eat through the house sale in 15 years, assuming I lived that long. But the average residency at Premier was only 18 months, not because people got better and left. The mortality statistics were buried in the fine print, but I found them. Most residents of involuntary placement died within 2 years. I searched for room 247B specifically. It existed. Second floor, north wing, shared bathroom, no window. 12 by 10 feet. Smaller than my closet, 1 visitor per week. Supervised, by appointment only. No personal furniture allowed, no cooking devices, no pets, no plants, nothing that made life worth living. It was a cell dressed up with medical terminology. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I printed every article, every review, every piece of evidence that Premier was where children sent parents they wanted to forget. The printer, old and slow, seemed to understand the urgency, churning out pages of proof that my daughter hadn't just betrayed me. She was planning to bury me alive. I confronted Sarah that evening when she came by with Chinese takeout, our Thursday tradition she'd suddenly reinstated after years of absence. The white boxes of food sat untouched between us as I placed the business card on the table like a loaded gun. She glanced at it, and I watched her face cycle through surprise, calculation, and finally, a cold resignation that turned her features into a stranger's. The daughter I knew disappeared, replaced by someone who looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. "You went through my things," she said. Not a denial, not an explanation, an accusation as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. "This is my house, Sarah, every room including yours." My voice stayed steady, though my heart was breaking into pieces I'd never be able to reassemble. "Room 247B, you already picked out where you're going to dump me?" She sighed like I was being dramatic. The same sigh she'd given as a teenager when I'd caught her sneaking out. "It's not dumping, Mom. It's caring for you. Appropriately. You're 68 years old. This house has 2 floors, a basement, a yard that needs maintaining. You can barely handle the stairs." "I handle them fine. I've handled them for 40 years. "You're in denial about your limitations." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. "I have documentation. 3 times you've forgotten our lunch dates. You left the water running in the bathroom last month. You called me Karen twice last week. I never forgot lunch. You changed the times and blamed me. You left that water running when you were snooping. And I called you Karen because I was talking about my neighbor Karen when you interrupted." Each lie she'd constructed fell apart when exposed to truth, but she didn't even flinch. "Mom, this is exactly what I mean. You're paranoid, confrontational, showing signs of dementia. The facility specializes in memory care. The facility specializes in Medicare fraud and elder neglect. Did you even research it, or did you just pick the one that would pay you the biggest referral fee?" For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised. How did I know about the $5,000 they give to family members who provide successful involuntary placements? Because unlike what you apparently believe, I can still read. I can still think. I'm still your mother, though you seem to have forgotten that. Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. She leaned back, crossing her arms, and the contempt in her eyes was like a physical blow. "You want the truth? Fine. Dave's business is bankrupt. We're losing our house unless we can pay off the loans by January. Your house is worth $850,000. The market's perfect right now. A developer already made an offer, cash, quick closing. All I need is your signature or power of attorney to override." "So you're selling your mother for money?" "I'm being practical. You live alone in a 4-bedroom house, Mom. It's wasteful, selfish, actually. That money could save my family, my children, your grandchildren, but you'd rather sit here, gardening and having your little book clubs while we lose everything. I offered to help with the loans. I said I'd take a mortgage." 50,000? That's nothing. We need real money. The house has to go, and honestly, Mom, so do you. You've had your life. This is our time now." The words hung between us like a death sentence. I studied my daughter's face, searching for any trace of the girl who'd made me Mother's Day cards, who'd cried when our cat died, who'd promised to take care of me when I was old. That girl was gone. Maybe had been gone for years while I kept loving a memory. "Get out," I whispered. "Mom, be reasonable. Get out of my house." The scream tore from my throat. 40 years of sacrifice turned into rage. She stood, gathering her purse with infuriating calm. "You have 2 weeks to sign voluntarily. After that, I'm filing for emergency guardianship. The documentation is solid. No judge will side with a paranoid elderly woman over a concerned daughter." She left the Chinese food on the table, a mockery of family dinners we'd never share again. I hired a private investigator with money from my emergency fund. The coffee can buried in flour that Sarah didn't know about because she'd never baked a thing in her life. Marcus Williams was a retired cop who specialized in elder fraud, and his office walls were covered with thank you letters from seniors he'd saved from their own families. "You'd be shocked how common this is," he said, taking notes as I laid out everything. Within a week, he'd uncovered a conspiracy that made my stomach turn. Sarah hadn't just started planning this recently. The paper trail went back 2 years, to when Dave's construction business first started failing. She'd been slowly building a case for my incompetence while simultaneously draining me dry. The power of attorney I'd signed last year during my gallbladder surgery. She'd altered it after the fact. The original only covered medical decisions if I was unconscious. Her version gave her complete control over everything I owned. She'd used the same notary, Dave's cousin, who'd backdated the fraudulent expansion. But that was just the beginning. Marcus discovered Sarah had already taken out 3 loans against my house, using the forged power of attorney. $200,000 total, spent on God knows what. The Mercedes in her driveway, bought with my home equity. Their vacation to Hawaii last month while claiming they couldn't afford to help with my roof repairs, funded by my life's work. She'd been telling creditors that I was mentally incompetent, that she was managing my affairs while I received treatment. The developer she'd mentioned wasn't just any buyer, it was a company called Sunset Ventures, and Dave was listed as a silent partner. They'd buy my house for $850,000, well below the $1.1 million market value, then flip it to another company they owned for the full price. The $250,000 difference would disappear into their pockets, all while making it look like a legitimate sale on paper. My house wasn't just being stolen, it was being used for money laundering. Marcus found emails between Sarah and someone named Dr. Richard Henley, a psychiatrist known for providing competency evaluations for cash. For $10,000, he'd testify that I had severe dementia, needed immediate intervention, and was a danger to myself. They'd scheduled my evaluation for next Tuesday, except they planned to tell me it was a routine checkup. The drugs Sarah had been putting in my tea, prescribed by Dr. Henley to cause confusion and memory loss, creating the symptoms they needed to document. The nursing home connection ran deeper, too. Premier Senior Living was owned by another shell company that traced back to Dave's business partner. They were getting kickbacks from every placement. My room wasn't just picked at random. It was their standard holding cell for property theft victims. Marcus had records of 17 other elderly people who'd been placed in the same room over 5 years. All of them had owned valuable property. None of them had lived more than 18 months after placement. The facility would over-medicate them into submission while their families sold everything. There were text messages between Sarah and her friend Jennifer, laughing about it. "The old bat actually thinks I care about her birthday next month," Sarah had written. "By then she'll be drooling in a wheelchair and I'll be shopping for a beach house." Jennifer had responded with laughing emojis and "Get that money, girl." They'd discussed methods for accelerating my decline once I was in the facility. "Heavy sedatives work best," Jennifer advised. "My uncle was gone in 6 months." The worst discovery was a life insurance policy Sarah had taken out on me 2 years ago, $500,000, with her as sole beneficiary. She'd forged my signature and had been paying premiums from the money she stole through the home equity loans. The policy had a 2-year contestability period that would expire next month. After that, my death would make her rich. Marcus compiled everything into a folder 3 inches thick. "This isn't just fraud," he said grimly. "This is attempted murder with paperwork." That night, after Marcus left with promises to contact law enforcement, I collapsed in my kitchen. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but slowly, like a building being demolished from the inside. My legs simply stopped holding me, and I found myself on the floor where Sarah had taken her first steps, clutching the folder of evidence against my chest like it might stop my heart from shattering completely. The linoleum was cold against my cheek, and I could see dust bunnies under the refrigerator that I'd missed during cleaning. Such a mundane detail while my world ended. The sobs came in waves, each one pulled from somewhere so deep it felt like my soul was trying to escape my body. I cried for the baby I'd carried for 9 months, feeling her kicks like butterfly wings against my ribs. I cried for the toddler who'd wrapped sticky fingers around my neck and declared I was the best mommy in the whole world. I cried for the teenager who'd screamed that she hated me, then crawled into my bed at midnight to apologize. Where had that girl gone? When had my daughter's heart turned to stone? I dragged myself to the living room, surrounded by photographs that now felt like evidence of my failure. Sarah's high school graduation, me beaming with pride while working 3 jobs to afford her college. Her wedding, where I'd given her my mother's pearl earrings because I couldn't afford a proper gift. Every Christmas morning, every birthday cake I'd made from scratch because store-bought wasn't special enough for my baby. The pictures mocked me now, showing a love that had only ever flowed one direction. I found myself talking to my husband's photograph, the one from our 25th anniversary, just 2 years before the heart attack. "I'm sorry, Robert. I'm so sorry. You trusted me to raise her right, and I failed. I gave her everything and somehow created a monster. What did I do wrong? Was it the overtime shifts that meant I missed her school plays? Was it letting her get away with too much because I felt guilty for being a single parent? Where did I fail her so completely that she could plan my death like a business transaction?" The folder had scattered across the floor, and everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of my daughter's calculated cruelty. The life insurance policy made me vomit right there on the carpet. She wasn't just willing to lock me away, she was banking on my death. Every hug she'd given recently, every "I love you, Mom," had been a performance while she counted down days until her payday. The texts calling me the old bat played in my mind on repeat. Is that all I'd become to her? An obstacle to her wealth? I thought about all the sacrifices that now seemed like cosmic jokes. The winter I'd eaten nothing but ramen so she could have a proper prom dress. The tooth I'd lost because I couldn't afford both her braces and my dental work. The relationships I'd turned down because Sarah needs stability. The promotion I'd declined because it would have meant traveling, leaving her with babysitters. Every choice I'd made for 30 years had been for her, and this was my reward. Room 247B, and a death that would make her rich. At 2 a.m., I found myself with my husband's old hunting rifle in my hands. It would be easier, wouldn't it, to end it on my terms rather than waste away in that horrible place, drugged and forgotten. Sarah would get her insurance money. The house would be sold. Everyone would win. My finger traced the trigger, and I wondered if Robert would forgive me for giving up. But then I saw our wedding picture on the mantel. Robert, in his borrowed suit, me in my mother's altered dress, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. We'd built this life from nothing, survived poverty, loss, hardship. We'd raised 3 children in this house, and 2 of them had grown into decent people. This was my house, my life, my story. and I'd be damned if I'd let it end with Sarah's betrayal. At 3 a.m., I set the rifle back in its cabinet and locked it. My hands had stopped shaking. The tears had dried into salt trails on my cheeks, and something else had taken their place. A fury so cold it felt like clarity. I stood up from the floor, my knees protesting after hours of collapse, and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the broken mother who'd been sobbing into linoleum. This was Dorothy, the survivor, the woman who'd buried a husband at 38 and raised 3 kids alone. The woman who'd worked double shifts with pneumonia because her children needed medicine. The woman who'd faced down worse than an ungrateful daughter's greed. I made myself a pot of coffee, strong and black, and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. At the top, I wrote, "Sarah wants a war. She gets one." Underneath, I began listing everything I knew about my daughter's weaknesses. Her vanity. She couldn't stand public embarrassment. Her social climbing. She'd spent years cultivating an image as the devoted daughter among her country club friends. Her arrogance. She'd never imagined I'd fight back. She'd counted on my maternal love making me weak. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was forgetting who taught her to be ruthless in the first place. When she was 12 and Brittany Mahoney was bullying her, who had taught her to document everything, build a case, and present it to the principal? Me. When she wanted that promotion at her first job, who showed her how to make herself indispensable while making her competition look incompetent? Me. Every strategic bone in her body had been shaped by watching me navigate poverty with precision. She'd learned at my knee, but the student hadn't surpassed the teacher yet. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First, my son Michael in Seattle. It was still midnight there, but he answered on the second ring, instantly alert when he heard my voice. "Mom, what's wrong?" Within 20 minutes, he'd booked a flight home. Then Tommy in Boston, who listened in horrified silence before saying, "I knew something was off with her. I'm driving down tomorrow." My children weren't all rotten. 2 of them still remembered what family meant. Next, I called my nephew James, the forensic accountant. "Aunt Dot, it's 4 a.m. But when I explained, his voice went from groggy to razor sharp. "Send me everything, every document, every bank statement for the last 3 years. We're going to trace every penny she stole." Then my niece Patricia, the attorney. "She did what?" "Oh, Aunt Dorothy, she picked the wrong family to mess with. I'll file an emergency injunction against any property transfers by 9 a.m. By 5 a.m., I had assembled my army. Marcus the investigator would coordinate with Patricia on the legal strategy. James would create a forensic accounting report that would destroy any credibility Sarah had in court. Michael and Tommy would come home as witnesses to their mother's mental competence. But I wasn't done. This wasn't just about stopping Sarah. This was about making sure she never did this to anyone else. I went to my computer and started typing. A letter to every member of Sarah's book club, her church group, her precious country club. Not emotional, not vindictive, just facts. What she'd done, what she'd planned, complete with copies of her texts calling me the old bat. I prepared 50 copies, ready to mail. Then I drafted a letter to the state licensing board about Dr. Henley, the psychiatrist who sold false diagnoses. Another to the FBI about the money laundering through Sunset Ventures. One to the state attorney general about Premier Senior Living's Medicare fraud. Sarah thought she'd been careful, but she'd been sloppy in her arrogance. She'd left a trail of evidence, confident that her confused elderly mother would never be able to follow it. Standing in my garden as the sun rose, I felt Robert's presence beside me. "Make her regret it," I whispered to the morning air. "Help me show her that mothers protect what's theirs." The war was about to begin. My revenge required precision, not passion. I spent the next week turning my dining room into a war room, covering the table where we'd shared 30 Thanksgivings with evidence boards, timelines, and legal documents. Patricia had filed the injunction, freezing any attempts to sell the house, but that was just defense. I needed offense. James discovered Sarah had been sloppy with the fraudulent loans. She'd used her own email address as the contact, creating a digital trail of intent. Every forged document had metadata showing creation dates that didn't match their supposed signing dates. I hired a second forensic analyst to examine the altered power of attorney. Under ultraviolet light, the additions Sarah made showed different ink aging. The original document had been written with a Pilot G2 pen I'd used for years. The additions were in Uniball Vision Elite, Sarah's favorite pen, which she'd foolishly used to sign her own legitimate documents. We could prove forgery down to the brand of ink. Patricia nearly cried with joy when she saw the evidence. "This is a prosecutor's dream," she said. The hidden cameras went up next. Tiny, motion-activated, connected to cloud storage that uploaded automatically to Patricia's office. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in my office. I wanted Sarah's next visit documented from every angle. Marcus coached me on what to say, how to lead her into admissions. "Don't accuse," he instructed. "Confused elderly people ask questions. Make her think she's winning while she confesses everything." I discovered Sarah had been telling everyone I had dementia for months, laying groundwork for her plan. So I scheduled my own psychological evaluation with 3 independent doctors, not the crooked Dr. Henley. All 3 found me mentally sharp, with cognitive function above average for my age. One noted I showed signs of stress and betrayal trauma, but 0 indication of dementia. I had the reports notarized, certified, and filed with the court before Sarah even knew I'd been evaluated. The financial manipulation went deeper than anyone imagined. James found Sarah had opened 5 credit cards in my name, maxing them out on luxury purchases. She'd been paying minimums from my checking account to avoid detection. Total debt, $73,000. Each application was wire fraud, mail fraud, and identity theft. Federal crimes with mandatory prison sentences. We documented everything, creating what the FBI would later call the most comprehensive fraud file they'd ever seen compiled by a victim. I reached out to the 17 families whose elderly relatives had died at Premier Senior Living. 12 responded, all with similar stories. Their loved ones had been involuntarily committed by family members who profited from their assets. We formed a coalition, sharing evidence and lawyers. The FBI had been investigating Premier for 2 years but lacked insider testimony. Now they had 18 witnesses and a clear pattern of conspiracy. The facility wouldn't just be shut down, everyone involved would face federal racketeering charges. My masterstroke came from remembering Sarah's vanity. She'd been documenting her lavish lifestyle on social media, funded by my stolen money. Every purchase, every vacation, every designer bag, all time-stamped, geotagged proof of spending she couldn't afford on her legitimate income. I created a detailed timeline showing each theft from my accounts matched with her luxury purchases within days. The Mercedes appeared on her Instagram 3 days after the first fraudulent loan. The Hawaii vacation photos started the day after she'd maxed out a credit card in my name. Then I found the smoking gun. Sarah had been careless with her phone, leaving it unlocked during a visit while she used my bathroom. I'd photographed her calendar, which included an entry 3 weeks out. Mom's house closing, champagne with Dave. She'd already celebrated my removal in advance. Another entry read, Dr. Henley Eval Prep. Remember confused act. She'd coached him on what diagnosis to give before he'd even met me. Patricia assembled everything into a RICO case, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was organized crime. Your daughter didn't just betray you, Patricia said, reviewing the files. She built a criminal enterprise around destroying you. But Dorothy, when we're done, she'll wish she'd just asked you for help instead. I scheduled the Thanksgiving dinner 3 weeks in advance, calling each family member personally. I want everyone together, I told them, my voice dripping with grandmotherly sweetness. At my age, who knows how many more we'll have? Sarah was suspicious at first. We'd barely spoken since our confrontation, but her greed overruled her caution. She probably thought I was ready to sign the papers, defeated and broken. She confirmed she'd attend, even offered to bring her famous cranberry sauce, the one she actually bought from Whole Foods and transferred to her own dish. The guest list was carefully orchestrated. Both my sons and their families, my siblings from Connecticut, Sarah's in-laws, including Dave's mother, who still didn't know her son was bankrupt, the neighbors Sarah had been telling I had dementia, Pastor Williams, and 3 ladies from my book club, all of whom Sarah had been cultivating as character witnesses for her guardianship case. 27 people total, every one of them someone Sarah needed to maintain her image with. But there were 3 guests Sarah didn't know about. Patricia would arrive as my friend from church. Marcus would come as Patricia's husband, and Agent Jennifer Morse from the FBI would attend as Marcus's sister. They'd all be wearing wires, though we hardly needed them with my house cameras recording everything in high definition. The week before Thanksgiving, Sarah increased her visits, playing the devoted daughter for anyone watching. She brought flowers, cooked meals, even cleaned windows. "I just want you to be comfortable, Mom," she'd say loudly, knowing Mrs. Henderson was usually in her garden. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything with my phone. Her performance of caring daughter while texting her lawyer about involuntary commitment proceedings made for damning evidence. Sarah arrived early on Thanksgiving, Dave in tow, along with Dr. Henley, whom she introduced as a family friend who happened to be in town. The audacity of bringing the man she'd paid to declare me incompetent to my own Thanksgiving dinner was breathtaking. He had the nerve to shake my hand, to compliment my home, all while planning to testify that I was too demented to live in it. I smiled and offered him appetizers, noting how his eyes cataloged my behavior, looking for signs of confusion he could document. The house filled with family. My grandchildren ran through rooms their mother planned to sell, their laughter echoing off walls she'd already mentally demolished. Sarah held court in the living room, telling everyone how worried she was about me, how she'd been taking care of me. "It's been so hard," she said to her mother-in-law, dabbing fake tears, watching her decline, knowing she needs more help than I can give. Dave nodded solemnly, the devoted son-in-law, while calculating property values in his head. I served drinks with steady hands, no tremor, no confusion, every movement deliberate, competent, sharp. Sarah noticed and tried to salvage her narrative. "She has good days and bad days," she whispered to Dr. Henley. "Today must be a good day." He nodded, making mental notes to explain away my obvious competence. Neither of them noticed Agent Morse standing nearby, recording every word. As we gathered for dinner, Sarah maneuvered to sit beside me, playing the attentive daughter. She cut my turkey, though I hadn't asked. She spoke slowly and loudly, as if I couldn't hear. "Is the food good, Mom?" The performance was for Dr. Henley, who watched from across the table, but everyone noticed the condescension. My grandson asked, "Why are you yelling at Grandma? She's not deaf." The dining room was packed, extra chairs borrowed from neighbors, kids' tables set up in the kitchen but visible through the doorway. The turkey was perfect, golden and glistening, the sides abundant, every family favorite represented. It looked like Norman Rockwell had painted the scene, the perfect American Thanksgiving. No one suspected they were about to witness the complete destruction of my daughter's life. As dessert was being served, I stood up, tapping my spoon against my glass. "Before we have pie," I announced, "I have something important to share with all of you." Sarah's face went pale. She knew that tone. It was the same one I'd used before grounding her, before taking away privileges, before every major consequence of her childhood. But this time, the consequence would be federal prison. I connected my laptop to the television, my hands perfectly steady as Sarah's weren't. "I wanted to share some family memories," I said sweetly. The first video began playing. Sarah in my kitchen, unaware of the camera, talking on the phone. Her voice filled the room. "The old bat actually believes I care about her. Once she's in premiere, we can sell everything. She'll be dead within a year anyway, they always are." The silence was absolute. Forks suspended midway to mouths. Sarah lunged for the laptop, but Michael blocked her. "Sit down, Sarah. Watch your home movies." The next video showed Sarah and Dave discussing the house sale. "We'll get her declared incompetent by December," Dave said. "My cousin at the bank already approved us based on the upcoming sale." Sarah laughed on screen. "She was always too trusting. Remember when I convinced her I needed money for textbooks and bought concert tickets instead? She never learned." Sarah's mother-in-law gasped. The neighbors exchanged horrified looks, but I wasn't done. The third video showed Dr. Henley coaching Sarah. "Make sure you mention confusion, aggression, and wandering. Those are key indicators for involuntary commitment." Sarah nodded. "What about the drugs you prescribed?" Henley's response chilled the room. "They'll create enough disorientation to support our diagnosis. Double the dose, if needed." Dr. Henley stood to leave, but Agent Morse blocked the doorway, finally identifying herself. "FBI, sit down, doctor. You're going to want to see the rest of this." I pulled out the original power of attorney, then the forgery, displaying both on screen. James explained the forensic accounting, showing how every theft corresponded with Sarah's purchases. The credit cards, the fraudulent loans, the money laundering through Sunset Ventures, each crime methodically documented. Sarah's Instagram appeared on screen, her smiling face holding shopping bags that represented my stolen savings. "That's not all," I said, my voice cutting through Sarah's attempts at denial. "I showed the life insurance policy, the $500,000 prize she'd win for my death. Then the emails between her and Jennifer, planning to increase my medication once I was in Premier. Heavy sedatives work best. My uncle was gone in 6 months." Sarah's friend Jennifer, who'd been invited and was sitting frozen at the table, tried to run. Marcus stopped her. "That's conspiracy to commit murder," he said calmly. "You'll want to stay for the police." I played the recording of Sarah from just minutes earlier, telling Dr. Henley I was having a good day, to explain my competence. Then I presented my 3 independent psychological evaluations, all confirming perfect cognitive function. "Seems like every day is a good day when my daughter isn't drugging my tea," I observed. The room erupted. Dave's mother screamed at him in Italian. My grandchildren were crying, not understanding why Mommy was being mean to Grandma. Pastor Williams stood up, his voice booming. "Sarah Patterson, you are no longer welcome in God's house." The church ladies formed a protective circle around me, Agnes actually hissing at Sarah like a protective cat. But the final blow was yet to come. Patricia stood up, identifying herself as my attorney. "Sarah Patterson, you're being sued for fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and attempted murder. The house you tried to steal? Your mother's will has been updated. You get nothing. Not a penny, not a photo, not even a recipe card." Sarah found her voice, screaming that I was lying, that everyone was against her, that she was trying to help me. Then she made her biggest mistake. She grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, shrieking, "You ruined everything, you stupid old woman." Michael pulled her off me while Tommy called 911. Sarah had just committed assault and battery in front of 27 witnesses, including an FBI agent. As the police led Sarah away in handcuffs, her children watching their mother's arrest at Thanksgiving dinner, she turned to me one last time. "I'm your daughter," she pleaded. "No," I replied, steady as granite. "I don't have a daughter named Sarah. She died the day she plotted to kill me for money." The last thing she saw before the police car door closed was her picture being removed from my wall of family photos. Sarah's trial became regional news. "Daughter plots to kill mother for house." Made headlines across New England. She was charged with 18 counts of fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, and racketeering. The FBI used her case to bust the entire Premier Senior Living Network, uncovering a multi-state scheme that had defrauded hundreds of families. Dr. Henley lost his medical license and faced 25 years. Dave was charged as a co-conspirator, their assets frozen, their house foreclosed. Sarah's children went to live with Dave's mother, who disowned her son but couldn't abandon her grandchildren. Sarah got 12 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release. The judge, a grandmother herself, called it the most callous betrayal of familial trust she'd seen in 30 years on the bench. During sentencing, Sarah showed no remorse, still insisting she was trying to help me. The prosecutor presented her jailhouse calls where she told inmates she'd do it smarter next time. There wouldn't be a next time. The financial recovery took months. James worked with federal prosecutors to reclaim everything Sarah had stolen. The fraudulent loans were voided, the credit cards were dismissed, the Mercedes was sold at auction, the proceeds returning to my accounts. I even received damages from Premier Senior Living's assets when they were liquidated. In the end, I had more money than before Sarah's scheme began, though I would have traded every penny to have my daughter back, the real one who'd existed before greed consumed her. My sons restructured their lives around protecting me. Michael moved his family from Seattle to a house 3 streets over. Tommy took a job teaching at the local high school, visiting every Sunday with groceries and grandchildren. They installed a medical alert system, not because I needed it, but because it made them feel better. We started a new tradition of Friday dinners, rotating houses, rebuilding the families Sarah had tried to destroy. The house became a different place without the shadow of betrayal. I redecorated Sarah's old room, turning it into a library where the book club now met. Her photos came down, replaced with pictures of the grandchildren who still visited, who called me Grandma Dot without being coached, who loved me without calculating my worth. The garden grew even more beautiful, as if the soil itself knew it was finally safe from destruction. I started a support group for elderly victims of family fraud. We met monthly at the community center, sharing stories and resources. Former victims of Premier Senior Living joined us, finally free to tell their stories. We successfully lobbied for state legislation, making elder abuse by family members a more serious crime with mandatory minimums. Dorothy's Law, they called it, requiring banks to flag suspicious transactions on elderly accounts and mandating verification for power of attorney changes. The letters from Sarah began arriving 6 months into her sentence. I recognized her handwriting on the envelopes, each one marked with the prison's return address. Patricia advised me to keep them unopened for legal reasons, in case Sarah made threats or admissions. They piled up in a box in the basement, 43 letters over 2 years, each one unopened, unread, unwanted. Michael offered to burn them, but I kept them as evidence of what I'd survived. One day, Sarah's children asked if they could visit. They were older now, understanding more about what their mother had done. "We miss you, Grandma Dot," the eldest said. "You're the only one who never lied to us." I welcomed them back carefully, never speaking ill of their mother despite everything. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' crimes. We baked cookies like we used to, played in the garden, rebuilt connections that Sarah had tried to sever. The house stood strong, no longer for sale, never to be demolished. I updated my will with Patricia's help, creating an ironclad trust that would protect the property for generations. Michael and Tommy were co-executors with specific instructions that Sarah could never inherit anything, even if she outlived everyone else. The house would become a family trust, then a historical property, but never, ever would it reward betrayal. At 70, I learned to live without the daughter I'd loved, grieving her as if she'd died, because in every way that mattered, she had. I still make soup on Sundays, the same pot, the same recipe my mother taught me. But now the kitchen fills with different voices. Michael's laughter, Tommy's children arguing over who gets to lick the spoon, neighbors who've become family in ways blood never guaranteed. The house that Sarah tried to steal has become a fortress of chosen family, people who love without calculation, who show up without checking my net worth first. Sometimes I stand in my garden at sunrise, coffee in hand, and think about the 2 daughters I lost. The one who died in childhood when greed replaced her soul, and the one serving time in federal prison. They're the same person, and yet not. A paradox I'll never fully resolve. The tomatoes still grow, the roses still bloom, and life has this stubborn way of continuing even after betrayal tries to poison the soil. The saddest truth I've learned is that sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for become the ones who'd sacrifice us for anything. Sarah wasn't born evil. I held her seconds after birth, counted her fingers and toes, promised to protect her from the world. I never imagined I'd need protection from her. Every school lunch I packed, every bedtime story I read, every tear I dried was real. My love was never the lie. Her reciprocation was. But here's what Sarah never understood, what greed blinds people to. Family isn't about blood or inheritance or houses. It's about showing up when someone's sick without checking if you're in the will. It's about calling because you miss someone's voice, not because you need their signature. It's about love that doesn't keep receipts or calculate return on investment. The sons who stood by me, the grandchildren who still visit, the neighbors who testified on my behalf, that's family. Sarah had the title of daughter, but never understood the job description. I think about the other 17 families destroyed by the Premier Senior Living Scheme, elderly parents discarded like furniture that's gone out of style. How many Sarahs are out there, plotting against the very people who gave them life? How many Dorothys are sitting alone, too embarrassed to admit their children see them as ATMs with expiration dates? Elder abuse by family members is the hidden epidemic no one discusses at Thanksgiving, the crime that happens in broad daylight while neighbors assume it's just family business. The document Sarah thought she burned taught me something vital. Evil often leaves evidence, assuming good people are too weak to use it. She mistook my love for weakness, my trust for stupidity, my age for helplessness. But I come from a generation that survived without Google or GPS or cell phones. We fixed things instead of replacing them, saved instead of spending, and fought wars both foreign and domestic. Sarah thought she was targeting a vulnerable old woman. She was actually taking on someone who'd survived 70 years of everything life could throw at her. If you're reading this and recognizing your own story, know this. It's not your fault that someone you love chose greed over gratitude. You didn't fail as a parent if your child fails as a human being. Love isn't supposed to be a transaction, and you're not obligated to finance someone else's life with your death. Document everything. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never ever be too embarrassed to ask for help. The shame belongs to the betrayer, not the betrayed. What would you do if your own child plotted against you? Would you have fought back like I did, or would family loyalty keep you silent? Have you seen similar betrayals in your own family or community? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you know someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in facing family betrayal, please share Dorothy's story. Sometimes the best inheritance we can leave isn't money or property. It's the courage to stand up for ourselves, even against those we love most. Like and subscribe if you believe family should mean protection, not predation. Remember, you're never too old to fight back, and it's never too late to discover who truly loves you.